So in this first session at GroupBy today, Aaron Bertrand is going to be explaining all of the bad habits that you have writing T-SQL. I just laugh at the example up on the screen because I'm like, I've totally written one big long monster line stored procedure that has been kind of heinous. So Aaron,
usually it's one line. Usually it's one long line, but I wanted to fit. I want to, so you could see it on the slide. All right, so yeah. And...
Or not. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just look at the slide.
So who's this Aaron Bertrand guy? So I'm a product evangelist at SentryOne. We make some pretty cool software, I think. You might have heard of Plan Explorer, but we also have some performance monitoring software for just about every aspect of Microsoft's data platform. So we're in SQL DW, we're in Azure SQL Database, on-premise SQL Server, obviously. So check us out. I've been an MVP for a long time. I started with SQL Server 6.5. I'm a moderator on a couple of sites. If you have database-related questions, I think dba.stackexchange.com is one of the best places to go for help. And if you have execution plan-related problems and you'd like people like Paul White and Rob Farley to help you answer your questions, answers.sqlperformance.com is the way to go. If you use Plan Explorer, you can actually upload your troublesome plans right from within the tool. That's pretty handy. I'm an editor on a couple of blogs, sqlperformance.com, and then we have a team blog. And I also write for mssqltips.com.
And he was the author of the year this year at MSSQLtips as well.
I was author of the year this year. I lost out to Cohen last year, so congrats to Cohen for last year. And this year, I was actually the top pick, so that was pretty humbling. That was pretty cool to win that award. I did something with this deck that I don't know why in 10 years I've never thought of doing this before. I put my contact info at the bottom of every slide because I imagine there are going to be people that are tuning in that get through half of this presentation and think this guy's full of crap or whatever, and then I might say something that actually interests you or that you want to respond to or something like that. So I think it's good to have contact info up on every slide. So if you see a slide and you suddenly think, oh, maybe this guy does know what he's talking about, you can contact me directly through either of those methods. So usually it's just on the beginning, and then you would have to go and watch the presentation or download the deck and go to the first slide. So I thought it'd be neat to put that at the bottom of every slide.
That's genius. I love it.
So a few disclaimers before I get started. One is I do come across in this session as demeaning and judgmental. Please don't take offense. I've learned all of these things the hard way, and these are things that I found out why they're bad habits and why you should do things a different way. And some of them are exceptions. So you have cases where this thing works 99% of the time, but if you're in this 1%, it's going to cause a problem. And if there's another way that you can do something that covers 100%, why use the one that only works 99% of the time? Right? So those are the kinds of things that I try to focus on. Most of the slides have links in the notes, and if you download the deck, it's already up on the GroupBy site. So if you go to my session page, the deck is already there, the samples are already there. And they have all kinds of details. If you don't believe me, there's proof, the background to why things are a problem or why things have changed, and all of the demos, obviously. And then the most important thing for me, I want to make sure that everyone takes away something, right? So when I do this in person, I always ask at the end of the session, did anybody not learn anything? And you can't really trust the answers, but I do appreciate when people will say, well, I knew everything in this deck. And my goal when I build this presentation is that I know that every slide is not going to be relevant for everyone. So Brent, you're gonna watch this deck and you know 99% of the things that are in here already. You're not really going to learn that much, or the average person is probably not going to learn something from every slide. But I do want to make sure that I hit something for everyone. Right.
If you've seen one line of code in SP Blitz, you would know better than to say that.
That's true. That's true. I have seen that. Yeah. All right. So anyway, that's the goal of my session. It's not to fill your brain with an hour of knowledge. It's to get you that one nugget that might help, the problematic store procedure you have, or set one of your behaviors to a better way to do things. So the agenda. How I used to break this deck up was really, I just had a a buffet of slides. I had 15 slides in here, and if I was doing a 60-minute talk, I would hide 3 of the slides, and if I was doing a 90-minute talk, I would make those appear again. And they weren't really in any logical order, and it was just a bunch of slides, and I would step through a slide, and I would do a demo, then the next slide, I'd do a demo. And I thought this time that I would break it up into sections so that there'd be less transition to and from demo, and less crap on slides and more demo. Right, so I have a section, and then I do a bunch of demos related to that section. So the sections are coding conventions, date responsibly, get predictable behavior, query efficiently, and stay employed. And the last one is just something that, if we have a couple of seconds at the end, I'll talk about. It's kind of a funny little thing. Coding conventions, I just want to talk about a bunch of things that people do that they could improve readability for other people. So a lot of things that when you're writing SQL code, you think, oh, well, this is just for me and it's fine. But if you put anything into a code base or into an application or a production app, someone else is going to inherit that code because you're not going to own it forever. Or someone else is going to learn from it, especially if you put your code into blog posts or answers on Stack Exchange and that kind of thing. Coding conventions are actually pretty important to instill best practices in other people, not necessarily yourself. So you might know better, and maybe you're lazy or you do things a certain way because that's just what you're used to, but think about the person who's consuming that code and what they're going to get from that. Dating responsibly, that's just a bunch of things where people tend to handle date time operations or data types incorrectly. And they make assumptions based on a closed environment, so use US English. There's certain things that a lot of us, I think, take for granted in how things work. Get predictable behavior. I'm going to show a couple of things where you don't quite get the things that you would expect. And then query efficiently, I think that's kind of straightforward. I'm going to talk about a few things that you can do to make your queries more efficient, or a few things that you should avoid that you might think make your queries efficient, but don't really. NOLOCK comes to mind. So coding conventions. Coding conventions are preferences. This is a very subjective thing. Nobody can tell you what is the right coding convention, what is the wrong coding convention. Like I was saying before, you should focus on making your code readable and self-documenting. I should be able to look at a piece of code, and just because you've made it cryptic by hiding something in a bit column or something like that, there should be enough in the code that I can understand what it's doing. And what standard you choose, not important. I don't care if you like uppercase in your keywords or lowercase in your keywords. None of these things are correct or incorrect. I'm not wrong, and we can both be right about the way that we code, even if we code differently. But not tabs versus spaces. There's no argument about that, right? We all know that spaces is correct and tabs is wrong.
Thank you. Thank you.
The important thing is pick a convention that makes sense, right? So and be consistent and make sure that your entire team is on board. There's nothing worse than having to format code just to modify it, right? You have a coworker that writes something a different way, and you can't like some things that I read, I have to reformat it before I can actually work on it because I can't read it the way that it's written. So a few of the specific things. Begin and end. I see a lot of people write code where they say if some condition and then they just have a statement, right? After the if, they just say something. They say go ahead and do that. This becomes a problem when someone else comes along and modifies the code and says, well, I also wanted to do this other thing, and so they just add that other thing in the indented portion of the code, and they don't understand why it happens every time. So begin and end. It's really nice to have those. Carriage returns and indents, that's just the code that you saw on the beginning slide. That's a mess. And people post questions on Stack Overflow all the time where it's literally one line of code and you have to scroll 5 screens over to see all the code. Nobody can read that. Nobody wants to read that. And everything justified to the left is no good either. Nice to have some indents and things like that. Table and column aliases, these are really handy to make your code short. I see code sometimes where someone's doing a join between tables in 2 different databases, and every column reference has database.owner.tablename.column and order by database.table.column it gets really messy. So aliases help clean that up. But don't do things like ABC or T1, T2, T3. Trying to reverse engineer this code. I had an example a few weeks ago where I was trying to answer a question, and they had customers as A join orders as B join addresses as C. And so you had customers was A and addresses was C, and then you're messing around with all the joins and the aliases later, and the A and C makes no sense. Makes no sense. Name your store procedure parameters. A lot of lazy coders out there that say exec sp-who2 active and don't specify what the parameter name is. For a system store procedure, that's not really a big deal because they're not going to go and change that on you tomorrow. But for user store procedures, absolutely should be very careful about naming parameters, because anytime someone can come in anytime and change the order of the parameters, and now your code breaks, right? And it might be troublesome to troubleshoot that. Keystrokes. So this is a fun one. I find a lot of people try to improve their productivity by typing fewer characters. So one of the examples that I'm going to show is month. So someone will say date add M date 1, date 2 instead of typing out month, which is fine for month because nobody would ever confuse that for minutes, right? But some people might. So that's just a case of self-documenting. But people do all kinds of things all over the place to save a couple of keystrokes, and it drives me nuts because if you save 4 keystrokes today, you're not going on vacation early. You're not gonna make the train versus not making the train if you type four extra keystrokes, right? So it's not people put a high priority on saving keystrokes, and it's just not. I don't know. It's like scraping one bug off your bumper to get better gas mileage, but it's not going to help. So I have some demos about this, about some of these things. One of them is properly defining variable length data types. So if you have a varchar, and what do you say? You say varchar? How do you say it?
I say I'm a caring guy, so I say varchar.
Caring guy. Yeah. So everybody pronounces this differently, and I mean, it doesn't really matter. I've always said varchar. Anyway, I see people say convert to varchar all the time, and they don't specify how many characters the varchar should be, and that leads to some unpredictable behavior. Lowercasing data types. This is a new one for me. Forever, I would uppercase all of my T-SQL keywords and all of my data types, just uppercase. That was just my habit. Made it very easy to differentiate those from objects and other things that are proper-cased or lowercase. Especially if I was reviewing code, because when I first started, I was always reviewing code in plain text editors. We didn't have all this nice fancy, color. I didn't always write in Query Analyzer, and so I would write in Notepad++ or things like that, and it was all black on white, or white on black, and so it was nice to have that differentiation. I learned recently, though, that when you have, and this is again this luxury we have with U.S. English and having this closed environment where we only have certain collation and case sensitivity, that kind of thing. There are certain data types that if you type them in uppercase, they'll actually fail. So geography fails if you try to invoke a method on geography and you say uppercase and you have a case-sensitive collation. So what I learned is that you're supposed to technically match what's in sys.types, because in certain cases, if you have a user-defined type, you need to match what's in sys.types, because if you deploy your code, and it might work fine on your machine, and this is the whole works fine on my machine syndrome. But you deploy to a case-sensitive collation, maybe you don't even know that the destination is case-sensitive, and all of a sudden all of your code is broken because your case doesn't match for your data types. So I've recently got into the habit of always lowercasing all of my data types, and I see my old code that I posted even a year ago, and I'm like, oh, the data types are uppercase, and I feel compelled to go and fix those. Match exact case for entities. So IntelliSense really helps out with this a lot, but you need to make sure that you have that your case matches. For the same reason, your code could end up on a case-sensitive collation, and then SQL Server is not going to be able to find dbo.employees if you put a lowercase e, and in the metadata it's stored as an uppercase e. It would actually expect those to be different objects. For T-SQL keywords, like I said before, if you like uppercase keywords or lowercase keywords, it doesn't matter. Just, again, pick something and be consistent. Semicolons. So Adam, we had a discussion this week with Adam, and Adam wants some confirmation that he should be using semicolons, and I absolutely think he should. I think everybody should be using semicolons to terminate all of their statements, and I'll show some examples of why. And the schema prefix. So one of the coding conventions that I see a lot of people do is they'll leave out the schema prefix because right now everything's in DBO, or they want to use the behavior where everything looks at your default schema. So we'll take a look at some examples of why you don't want to do that. All right, so properly defined variable length data types. So I have some code here where I'm declaring a variable as a varchar, and I'm setting it equal to my first name. And then, so I'm going to select that, and I'm also going to convert inline to an nvarchar the string, there once was a man from Nantucket. Brent, what do you think will show up here?
Oh, I remember there's a gotcha, and I can't remember. I think Aaron works, but there once was a man from Nantucket gets clipped, and I have no idea where.
Okay.
And I'm probably wrong on both, but damn it.
So selecting the variable ends up with an A. So that truncated at one character. Doing the convert truncated at in the middle of Nantucket.
God.
So there are cases where varchar without a length is 1 character, and there are cases where varchar without a length is 30 characters. And it will silently truncate, and that, if you have a parameter to a store procedure that takes that in, the data's gone. It doesn't get logged, there's no error, there's no warning, it just gets truncated.
And that's like 6 hours of debugging right there as to why your code doesn't work.
Right. So let's say you have a table, call it dvo.rutRow, that has 2 varchar max columns. And now I have a store procedure and it's not just about specifying a length or not, it's also about specifying a length that's not long enough. So I have a store procedure here that takes 2 parameters, parameter 1 and parameter 2. One's a varchar and one's a varchar tab. And all they do is just insert those values directly into the table. Then I execute that store procedure with 2 parameters. One is some important data, and the other parameter is even more important data. Now, if we take a look at what actually got stored in the table, we don't have all of our important data. So we had
It's like MySQL.
some important data became an S, and even more important data became even more. So I called that store procedure, and because maybe my unit tests just checked for success, I don't think there's a problem here. So I deploy the store procedure to my production environment. People start using the new store procedure, and we're losing data all over the place, and we have no idea that we've lost all that data. Because it's varchar max, why would anything be truncated?
Wow.
Because the parameter truncates it, and it's silent.
Nicely done.
So another thing about declaring the right size for your varchar, so if you have a column, I see what a lot of people do is they'll create a table and they'll put a varchar column in there and they'll say, well, I don't really know how big the biggest string will be, so let's just do max, or let's just do 4,000 or 8,000. And they'll create that table and they'll put that information even there. Even if no value is ever more than 10 characters, at least they're covered just in case. But it actually does cause problems. So I have 3 tables. They're all the same except for the columns are either varchar. Whoa, I'm sorry. How does that look?
As you can see here. If you're trying to get me to pull your finger, that's not going to work.
I'm so much more used to presenting in person where I'm actually pointing at screens. Yeah. So we have 3 tables here, and they have columns A, B, C, and D. One has they're all nvarchar 32. One is all nvarchar 4000, and one is all nvarchar max. So we have those 3 tables, and I'm just going to insert a whole bunch of data in here. And the data is all going to be very short, right? So it all fits into an nvarchar 32, no problem. But we have these tables that were designed with larger sizes.
So for those of you who are watching, there's 3 different insert statements there, but the reason the first one's different is he's dumping those all into T1 first, then he's just taking T1 and populating T2 and T3.
Right. I'm saving keystrokes, which made
yes.
this demo come together much quicker. I got this done so much faster. So now I'm going to run a few queries against these tables, and I'm just going to run them each once. And it's just select distinct A, B, C, D, and I'm doing this on purpose so that there is grouping and sorting. And so we're going to need to use memory in order to satisfy these queries.
Oh.
Right?
Seems like the second one's taking a little bit longer.
The ones with the wider columns do take a little bit longer. We'll see why in a second.
Mm. When are you presenting this on a netbook, or what kind of hardware you got there?
This is a Mac Pro.
All right. Yeah. How much memory you got on this bad boy?
64 gigs.
Woohoo!
There we go.
Okay.
So it took 30 seconds. Let's see where all the time was spent. You would think, oh, well, they probably each took 10 seconds, right? They're returning a bunch of data to a grid. But if we take a look at sysdm exec query stats, we see what happened. So even though we selected the same data, we ran the exact same queries, because of the data types, SQL Server made assumptions about the size of the data that would be returned, and therefore the amount of memory that would be required. And it actually generated different plans because of that. So when SQL Server looks at a column and you've decided, oh, well, we'll just make this nvarchar 4000 so we're covered just in case, SQL Server actually believes that the average value will contain 2,000 characters. So when you have varchar 4000 and it's vastly oversized and all of the values are 10 characters, you're actually, the memory that SQL Server will grant to this query is 2,000 bytes per row just for that column, instead of the 10 bytes that it really needed. So you can see how the granted KB goes way up over time, and how that actually affects the elapsed time.
I'm going to guess that monitor behind you is so big because when you display varchar max data, you actually need to show all of it.
That's true. It wraps around the entire room. There's a monitor here and a monitor here, and I spin in circles. All right, so what else do we have? Oh, so lowercase data types. So let's create, and I hope I didn't already create this. I did not. Okay, so create database flubmore, and I'm going to use collation of Latin general bin 2. Now, this is the case I was talking about where you have something like geography, and you think, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Case for data types doesn't matter, right? I can do this, and I can get an answer, and it works, no problem, right? Here's my spatial results. No big deal. Well, it doesn't really show anything. It's just this stupid line, but. Now, if I try the same thing in that case-sensitive database with uppercase geography, it tells me that it's not even a system-defined type.
That's insane.
So you have to be very careful about that. And I'm telling you, you're going to have people that deploy SQL Server in all kinds of weird ways with different collations and different case sensitivity, and you don't know where you're going to end up. So it's much safer to just be safe and match whatever's in sys.types. So this isn't as important for varchar. I couldn't find a case where varchar would break if you typed it in uppercase, but just as a consistency thing, just match what's in sys.types. I just think it's safer. That might break in the future. I don't know, but I would be very careful about that. Lowercase your types.
Even for those of you who
exact
don't
case for.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right. So matching exact case. So let's have a table called sales orders has an int column. And I'm going to free the procedure cache. And I do this in a lot of my demos just so you don't think I'm pulling the wool over your eyes or benefiting from something I did before. And I'm just going to run queries against this table. I'm going to run 3 different queries, and I'm going to run one twice just to show that so it's clear which one is which in the results. So select top one sales order ID from dbo.salesorders, and then the second version of the query has all of the entities in lowercase. And the third version of the query has all of the keywords in lowercase. So this is going to demonstrate two things. One is to use consistent code for your keywords. So if you like uppercase, always use uppercase. Don't do this, well, most of the time I use uppercase, but in this one situation I'm going to use lowercase, right? And then the other is obviously the entities themselves. So let's run these queries. I have nothing in the cache, so no tricks here, no magic, anything like that. And then if we go look at what has been cached in the plan cache, I'm just taking a look at sysdm exec cache plans and then cross-applying to sysdm exec SQL text, so I can find my my queries where lower of the text is like sales orders. And if we look at those, I actually stored 3 different copies of that identical query in the cache just because of differences in case. So the query text is hashed to binary, and so when you have an uppercase s and a lowercase s, that ends up as a different value. And so SQL Server has to store a separate copy of that plan. So I ran that same query 4 times, and I actually had to store 3 different plans. So I tripled my plan cache usage for that one query because one of my developers used lowercase and one of my developers used uppercase. So let's take a look at something else. We have well, it's first in the list. It's alphabetical. So I didn't pick Albanian because I have anything against Albanians. Just so I'm creating a database called Boom. Same thing. I create a table called sales orders, and maybe I've deployed this code using SSDT or a DAC pack or whatever they call those things now. So selecting sales order ID from sales orders works. Selecting sales order ID from dbo.salesorders in all lowercase doesn't even work. It can't find the object, right? So that's no good. But it will let me create a stored procedure with the wrong case. So if my initial testing is just, well, the procedure compiled, so we must be good, right? That's not necessarily going to be the case because deferred name resolution allows you to specify objects that don't exist yet. And SQL Server will assume that you didn't type this wrong, that you actually, there's an object you're going to create later called dbo.salesorders. I think we need a feature in SQL Server that allows you to turn off deferred name resolution.
Well, and especially with stuff with if branches, because if I screw up one if branch and usually everybody hits the other one, my stuff compiles, it runs fine, but when they hit that one odd if branch, the thing explodes.
Right. Yeah. All right, so semicolons. Adam, I hope you're listening. So with every new version, more and more syntax requires semicolons. I believe in 2008 they deprecated transact SQL statements without semicolons. So this is something that might not happen in our lifetime, but in case it does, I really think that everybody should be using semicolons at the end of their statements. So I have a few examples here of where it can happen or where it can bite you and how it might be difficult to troubleshoot. So I have a store procedure here called problem, and it takes I as an integer. And what we're doing is we're going to begin try. We're going to start a transaction. We're going to select 1 over I. You can probably see where this is going. And then we're going to commit the transaction, right? And we're going to go into end try. Right? When we go into our catch handler, we're going to have rollback transaction and then throw. Right? We're going to throw the exception, which is a much more powerful method now than raise error, because throw allows you to raise the initial exception instead of a user-defined one. And then end catch, end and go. And so we're going to call the store procedure with the parameter of I is equal to 1. And it works, no problem. Oh, and I already created the procedure. So I had creator alter here, but then when I uploaded the samples, I was like, well, I can't put creator alter because not everybody who runs the samples is going to have a version of SQL Server that supports that. So I have the store procedure already created, and I'm going to execute it with a parameter of 1, and it works no problem, right? I get select 1 over 1, which equals 1. And then now I'm going to try it with exec.dbo.problem at I is equal to 0. And you expect a divide by 0 error, right? Because we're trying to divide 1 by the parameter. And if it fails, obviously we're going to go into our catch handler. We're going to roll back, and we're going to throw. So that's how it's going to work, right?
Yeah, it should. Yeah.
Yeah, not quite. So what happens is cannot roll back throw. No transaction or save point of that name was found.
What?
Yeah. So transaction count after execute indicates a mismatching number. So now imagine you're the developer trying to troubleshoot this. What do you do? So the problem is because rollback transaction did not have a semicolon.
That it thinks it's a transaction.
What it thought this is rollback transaction throw.
What an idiot.
Wow. So that is all caused by not having semicolon after rollback transaction. If I change this to alter, and I just add that one semicolon here, right? Never type in a demo, by the way. This is bad. So I'm going to change my store procedure. And I'm going to do this again, exec 0. Now I get the divide by 0 encountered.
Wow.
So all I have to do is add that one semicolon, and problem goes away.
That's horrible.
There's some other new syntax. So merge, we're going to talk in a few minutes about merge and why you shouldn't be using merge, I think anyway. But if, let's say we have a table called X, and of course it already exists because I ran through my demos this morning. And now I'm going to run a merge statement. This should work no problem, right? Merge X as X using values as Y on X is X dot I is equal to Y dot I. When matched, then update set I is equal to Y dot I. When not matched, then insert. Right? So it's just an upsert using merge. Except a merge statement must be terminated by semicolon. So there are cases where you have to put a merge there. You have to put a semicolon there.
That's kind of cheesy because if you're good enough to memorize all the parts of the merge statement and you forget the semicolon, you deserve like a special prize because the merge statement is the hard part.
There should be a conversation. Oh, you did it first try without a syntax error? You don't have to put a semicolon. Don't worry about it. You're good.
Yeah, we'll give you bonus points.
So the excuse that I always hear, the only justification I ever hear for not using semicolons is that, well, I don't have to. I haven't found a good reason to not use semicolons. It's just the I don't have to excuse, and I don't think that's good enough because what I feel you're doing, you're just justifying more technical debt. So I have a blog post out on SQL Blog where I've had a bunch of people comment back and saying, well, Microsoft will never enforce this, blah, blah, blah. I want to bring up some political stuff right now that people promised and didn't do, or promised and did. And,
oh my goodness!
But I'm not going to get into that. But what I say to them is, what you're doing basically is if you're saying, well, I'm going to adamantly not put semicolons in my code, you are just making your code base. You're just adding more to your code base that you'll have to fix later if they ever do enforce this. So
and they've made worse decisions before. I mean, they've made stranger things happen before.
Right. Yeah, notification services, like that just happened. This has been announced for 9 years now. They're going to make semicolons mandatory. 9 years. Yeah. And just because they haven't enforced it yet doesn't mean they won't. So when I got really adamant about always having semicolons in my code was I used to post answers to Stack Overflow that use CTEs. So CTEs came out in SQL Server 2005, and they were the first real syntax problem where semicolons were relevant. And so I would write an answer like this, and obviously this wouldn't be an answer on Stack Overflow because it's too simple, but just imagine that this was a much bigger piece of code. I would say, here's a CTE that does this. With X, I, select one, select I from X. And I would paste that into an answer, and I would post it on Stack Overflow. And an hour later, I would get a nastygram from this person, because what they did is they would take this code, just like this, and they would have a stored procedure that they were running, and they would paste it right here, like this. And they would say, well, I took your code, and I put it in my procedure, so let's create this stored procedure. And it would break. Incorrect syntax near the keyword with, because they weren't using semicolons, so their code had this declare at I int that wasn't terminated, and now I'm the bad guy because I broke their store procedure basically.
Except if this really happened on Stack Exchange, it would also have things like my client asked me to, and I
Right,
got
right.
fired
Yeah.
because.
So I just find that it's very rare that you can have too many semicolons, right? So you can put as many semicolons into this thing as you want. This is valid SQL. All these semicolons in here, you can do that. And it's stupid, and I would never do that, but I can. It's usually more common that a missing one causes problems than anything else. So Adam was very adamant that that I needed to convince him to use semicolons, but it doesn't look like I need to convince him at all. This is a snippet from SP who is active, and it's actually pretty consistent in there. He uses semicolons even on things where I don't, like begin and end. So he's already doing this. So the reason I brought it up to Adam specifically is because in his session last week, and I downloaded the demos to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, not a single semicolon in any of the demos. So I just wanted to kind of call him out about that.
Oh, jeez.
So it's do as I say, not as I do, because his actual production code does have semicolons.
Did he show you
schema
that
prefix.
No?
I'm sorry?
Did he show you his
Show
production code?
No, he did not. But I'm just basing it on an SP who is active. All right, so last demo in this section, we're going to create two schemas called Brent and Aaron. And I'm going to create two users called Brent and Aaron, and they have default schemas that match their names. I'm going to create a simple table in the DBO schema, and I'm going to grant select to both of these users. So just to prove I'm not messing with anything, I've got another free proc cache. Yeah. And I'm going to execute these two statements as Brent and as Aaron. And they're both doing the exact same thing. Select ID from simple table. And we're going to see what happens. So there's nothing in the table, but I did cache some plans, right? So I'm going to check the plan cache again and see from cache plans and system exec SQL text, get me all the queries that involve simple table. And text is not like sys, so I don't want to pull back my queries against the system objects. And we see the same query stored in cache twice, and using up twice as much plan cache memory as I need to for this query. They're both accessing the same table, and they're both returning the same data. So why should I have two different plans for this that are identical? The only difference is that they have different default schemas. So if we go back, and I go back into this code and just do what I should have done in the first place, which is type dbo dot at the beginning of these things, I'm going to free the proc cache again, and I'm going to run these batches again with that one change. All I did was add the schema prefix like I should have always done. I get the same queries back. And now if we check the plan cache again, now we have one copy of that plan. I'm only taking 32K of plan cache memory, and it was used twice. So I get plan cache reuse because I specified the schema prefix correctly. And there's an example down here that shows why that is, and you can dig a little bit deeper into the exec plan attributes.
Oh my goodness, I didn't have the questions panel open, and you guys have poured in a ton of questions. We will go through and ask the questions at the end. So.
Yeah, that's probably good. All right, so Act 2 is about dating responsibly. So one of the things I see people do, and I mentioned it already, is date time shorthand. So they do things like date at D instead of date at day, because saving 2 characters really changed their day. Or get date -1. You ever do get date -1 to find right now yesterday? You've done that, right? Yeah, so we'll talk about that. Yeah. Regional formats, have to be very careful about regional formats. People love to pass in date literals as m/d/y or d/m/y, and I'll show why that's a problem. Between, a lot of people like using between for date range queries, and it's very problematic because it's very difficult to determine the end of a period. What is the end? Oops, what is the end of February? Really? Can you tell me?
I'm so bad with milliseconds. I'm trying to like February 28th and some change.
Right, if it's not a leap year.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, so calculating the end of a period has a bunch of little complications. Format. So people like format because they can now have output in SQL Server that looks just like the output in C# with the same incoming format, right? But there's some significant overhead with CLR. And then non-chargeable expressions against columns. People do things like year of order date is equal to 2017 and month of order date is equal to 1 to find all of the orders in January, and that's not necessarily good either, especially if you have an index on that column. And then predicates using data at dateif. I don't have a demo of this, but I do have a link in the slide notes. I have 2 links in the slide notes actually that show a couple of bugs in the optimizer that make for really bad estimates when you're using data at or dateif in the where clause. All right, so let's go to a demo for this one. So Act 2. All right, so Brent, you have a piece of paper and a Sharpie handy?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have you take a little quiz. So I'm declaring a date variable as getDate, right? So this is today. No tricks. It's not, I didn't change my system time or anything like that. And I want you to tell me what these 4 answers will be. So just write down your answers for date part D.
Okay, so date part D is going to be B. Date part week is, oh man, I don't know the calendar. Week, W, let me shoot. I don't have a, where's a calendar? Not the calculator, calendar. Man, how unprepared am I? So show me the month. Let's see here. It is the 3rd week. So I'm going to guess something that's not on your list. I thought the second one, date part week, would be, oh no, it's weekday. It's weekday. Whew. Oh man, Microsoft Certified Master at Work. I'm going to say date part, that's going to be, God, I'm going to guess 5. I'm going to guess that that's B5.
Okay.
This one's 20. Month, see, I don't know if M is month or minute.
Right.
And I would have to hit books online. I'm going to guess this minute. I'm going to say C minute. And then so the date part of the year, I'm going to say is 2017.
All right, so you've written down your answers?
Yes.
Let's hold them up and compare.
All right, cool. There we go. All right, so I got 20 right. I got 5 and 6 wrong because I wasn't sure when the weekday starts. I'm like, I don't know if it depends on your
Friday 6.
Yeah, and then date part I got wrong because I wasn't sure if it's minutes or months. And how the hell is date part Y 20?
All right, so the reason is, so D, that's just, I did a progression of date times. So D isn't really a trick, right? D and day are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so today's the 20th day. No problem. You got that right. W, that's day of week, not week. A lot of people will look at that and say, oh, it's W. Oh, that's week.
Yeah.
Easy, right? And that's so day of week is 6. And actually, I should have had 3 and 4 as the
right.
like the week
I would
of the
go
ISO
for the wrong
week.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my bad. And then date part M. So you said a very interesting thing. When I see date part M, I would have to go look at books online to see what it means. That's not self-documenting code. If you have to go look at books online to figure out what you've written, that's terrible, right? So that's actually date part month. That's not minute. Now date part Y, that's not the year. That's the day of the year. Right? So if you meant Y, if you meant year, just type year. It took you 8 extra microseconds. There's nothing wrong with actually making this self-documenting, and I harp on people all the time about this. Just spell it out, type it out. If you meant month, type month. It's not hard. It's a few extra keystrokes, and it'll prevent you from having to go look in books online.
There's a saying in drivers: if you make another driver hit the brakes, then you're a bad driver. Doesn't matter how good you think you are. If you make somebody else hit the brakes, if you make me hit books online when I'm reading your code, you suck as a developer.
Yep, that's true. All right, so another one is the shorthand, the +1 shorthand. So if I do this, if I use date time and I say declare at dt date time is equal to current timestamp, and I say select at dt is +1, no problem. I get tomorrow at this time. It's 8:44 East Coast time tomorrow. if suddenly the data type of the column where I'm performing this +1 or -1 operation against changes, or the data type of the parameter, and that can happen outside of SQL Server. I can declare a parameter in my SQL code inside of C#, right? And that would be invisible to whatever code is in SQL Server. So declare at d datetime2 is equal to the current timestamp, and I try select at d +1, I get an operand type clash. So the new date time types that were introduced in SQL Server 2008, they don't play well with others. They don't do all of the things that the old types did, and implicit integer math is one of those. So be careful about that. Just use explicit data add. Regional formats. So we have something like this where these three formats, year dot month dot day and month/day/year and YMD space time. These all work in my local system because I'm using US English and I have an English locale, and they all produce September 8th. No problem there. However, if I do something silly, like change my language to French, no one would ever do that, right?
America.
And I select those same dates that I thought were safe, I actually get August 9th for all three.
America.
Even this one, which surprised me the first time I saw this, right? So I have Y-M-D, and this is interpreted as Y-D-M in French and German, and most of the European languages, this is interpreted as YDM for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Same reason that they won't use inches and pounds and feet.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So for this case, if I want this to be safe, I have to use YYYYMMDD, or if I want to use if I have time, I need to use the dashes and put a T in where that space was. And this tells SQL Server, I don't give a rip what their language is, I don't give a rip what their locale is, this is how I'm going to interpret this. So even in French language, this is going to be interpreted as September 8th the way I intended. This is one of those cases where there is an exception where it always works. So date, if I'm converting to date, it will always work correctly whether I put the dashes or not. But that doesn't mean that you should do that, right? Use these two formats. These are the only two that are truly safe in SQL Server across the board.
And it sucks because the first one makes my eyes hurt, but
it is a little harder to read, yeah. All right, so I'm probably going to have to drop the table. Sales orders.
You didn't put a semicolon in there? That's the problem right there.
Hey, quiet, quiet. All right, so I'm going to create a table called sales orders and has an order date column called date time, or that's date time 2. And I've inserted a bunch of data in here. So February 1st, February 5th, the 19th, the 28th at 1:27 in the afternoon, the 28th just before midnight, and March 1st. Okay, so then we can look at the data in this table, and I've got my 7 rows here. There's 7 rows in total. 6 of them are in February, and 1 of them is in March. So the old millisecond trick, so this is what people would do, right, to find the end of February. They would say, well, the start is February 1st. Let's say I'm trying to find all the data from February 1st to the end of February. The start is February 1st. The end is, well, let's take March 1st and subtract 3 milliseconds. So we get 2359.59.997, right? And now when we select the data from that table between those 2 periods, or between those 2 points in time, we only get 5 rows. We're missing a row. Because we had date time 2, we're missing this row right here. Because .999 is not between midnight on the 1st and 2359.59.997 on the 28th. So we lost data. And it might be a very small portion of data that we lost, but we want our reports to be right, right? Mm-hmm. It gets worse. So let's say the parameters for this store procedure change to small date time. So I'm passing in the same information. The start is February 1st, and the end is the end of the month, or the beginning of the next month, minus 3 milliseconds. And I'm going to do between start and end. Now, because it's small date time, it rounded up. I included data from March 1st. But I didn't know that. My application, right? I'm the application developer, and I'm passing parameters into the store procedure, and the store procedure parameter data types happen to change. Or maybe they convert in a local variable or something like that.
Wow. What's the resolution on small date time? I don't even know.
Small date time is minute.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it rounds. If you have at the end of a minute, it rounds up. So if you try to find the end of the day, it rounds up to the next day, which is not good. Makes your data wrong. So parameters change to date. We have start date is equal to February 1st, and the end is 3 milliseconds before March 1st, and we run that query. Now we only have 4 rows. So because we said start is between the 1st of the month and essentially the 28th of the month at midnight, we lost all of the rows from after midnight on the 28th. Right, so
several folks have asked in the Q&A and in Slack why -3 instead of -1. There's 3 millisecond resolution for daytime.
Right, 3 millisecond resolution for a daytime in SQL Server. And then EO month, I see a lot of people excited about EO month, and it's terrible. It does the same thing we just did here where we convert to date. So declare at start date is equal to February 1st, and you think, oh, well, I want everything from the start of the month to the end of the month. EO month tells me it's the end of the month. Now I don't need to calculate it. Yay! How awesome is that? Except the end of the month is the last day of the month at midnight, not truly the end of the month.
Oh, God.
So what I recommend for this, never use between for date range queries. Always use greater than or equal to the first of the month, or greater than or equal to the beginning of the period, and less than the beginning of the next period.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So instead of doing all this fun math and everything else.
Good demo there.
Yeah, so stop using between. Open-ended range is safer and far easier to calculate than the end of a period. So if I say declare at start date, if I want all the data for February, I just say where it's greater than or equal to the 1st of February and less than the next month, right? So less than date add month 1 of start. And this will always work. It doesn't matter what my data types are. I'm always going to capture all of the rows from February and none of the rows from March.
And then in Slack, D. Briskin says, that only works until developers pass in 12/31/99/99. Come on now.
All right, so the Y10K problem. Got it. I won't be around when that happens, so enjoy that. All right, so next thing I'm going to do, format. I'm going to show how inefficient format is. So these two queries return the same output, right? So, oh, wait a second. Oh, it's just a declare. All right, so let me add X just to prove that these show the same output. Right. So here's convert car8 112 returns 2016 1210, and if I use format and use YYYYMMDD returns the same output. Right. These are the same queries, except one uses format and one uses convert. So I'm going to free the procedure cache, and I'm going to run both of these queries 50 times just to see what the average runtime is. I can go past 9 o'clock, right? A little bit?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's when's the next one start? Hugo's on at 9:30, I think.
Okay. All right. So I go a little over. Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
All right. So now, instead of, a lot of times what people do is they'll set up like date time variables at the beginning or the end, and they'll time these things, or they'll have a table where they log stuff. This is all in query stats. So we can go look at sysdm exec query stats and see what the runtime of these things were. So here's convert. Total elapsed time, 725 milliseconds. For format, 5 million, or 5,078 milliseconds. So the average time, it's almost 10x performance difference. That the performance penalty you're paying to have this nice, pretty format instead of memorizing what 112 means.
Ouch.
So format looks like it's something that's cool that you should be doing, and it's actually pretty expensive to do. All right, so last one for this section. I'm going to create a new table called objects, and it's just 50,000 rows from 50,000 objects and columns and modify date from sys.allObjects. I'm going to create a unique clustered index on ID and column ID, and then I'm going to create a non-clustered index on the modify date column. And then I'm going to run these 3 queries and just look at the execution plan for these. So we have select ID from objects where year of modified date of, sorry, I should preface this. So I want to find all the data for January of this year. All the objects that were modified this year, and I have no idea what the answer is because I've made a bunch of changes, right, in this database. But select ID from dbo.objects where year of modified date is equal to 2017 and month of modified date is equal to 1. Pretty simple, right? People write this kind of thing all the time. Or I can do it this other way, where I strip the time from the date by making it a string. Right? So convert car 10, and actually that should be convert car 6. Bad Aaron, bad demo. So people will say, well, I don't need to care about stripping time or doing any of that. I can just convert this thing to a string where it's 6 characters, which means
this is the safe one.
Right, this is the safe one. And then the last one, right? Well, this is one that they'll show me year-month, and that's it, right? So it doesn't care about what the day or the time is. Or I can do it the way that I'm supposed to do it, which is greater than or equal to the beginning of the month and less than the beginning of the next month.
That's hard work.
Because remember, we're using an index, right? So when you have an index and you do anything against that index, against the column in that index, you effectively negate the use of the index. You can't use the index if you apply an expression to it first. So we'll take a look at the execution plan for these. And yeah, so the two methods we had where we apply transformations to the column cost a lot in terms of estimated cost at least, and the one that used my preferred method of greater than or equal to and less than is much less. And you can see why. I mean, you don't have to necessarily take too much stock in these numbers, but just look at the plan itself. We've got an index scan and an index scan versus an index seek. And a seek isn't always the best way to get data from a table, but in this case it probably is.
What was the yellow bang on the second one?
The yellow bang
On
right
the
here?
select. No, run that query again, and there was a yellow bang on the select in the execution plan.
Oh, probably conversion. Oops. Yeah, I dropped it already.
Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
That's okay. We can go take a look. I think there was just a warning for an implicit conversion. Sorry, I'm not used to scrolling in here. Hello, there we go.
Because you have that big monster monitor behind you.
Yeah. So it's type conversion. So if we convert to car 6,
Very nice.
it's just a cardinality estimate warning based on the conversion.
Love the SSMS team.
Okay, let's move on. Predictable behavior. So merge. I'm sure you've used merge. I'm sure you have clients that have used merge. I have changed almost every client I've seen using merge to not use merge. So I have a URL here, bit.ly/merge with caution. I don't have a demo for this, but there are a bunch of problems with merge. One is one that Michael Swart has blogged about as well, and that is that most people don't realize that just because merge is a single statement, it's not a single operation. It's not an isolated operation. It actually handles those operations underneath, the update, the delete, the insert. It handles those as separate operations. So if you don't use hold lock or serializable transaction around that merge statement, you're actually still doing the same thing you used to do with update and insert, except you don't have any transactional control over that. So you can still end up with race conditions. I also, in this URL, I have, I think, 14 connect items that haven't been resolved yet, and some of them are no big deal. Some of them actually lead to the ability to bypass constraints because of the order of the operations the merge does. So my suggestion, if you are thinking about using merge, just use the way that you already know works. Just use update and insert. SPMS for each DB, please don't use this store procedure to loop through databases and do something. I wrote a replacement that's in the slide notes, and the reason is they use a cursor, and this is an undocumented and unsupported procedure, so you probably shouldn't be using it anyway. But the way that they use the cursor in this store procedure, it means that if there's any activity in databases, specifically that affects sys.databases, this store procedure will actually skip that database, and it'll essentially do a read past, and it won't tell you. So if you say, update the, let's do fragmentation against, or do some kind of index defragmentation against all of our databases, and it skips a database. It doesn't tell you, oh, by the way, I didn't do this database. It just doesn't do it, and that can be a pretty big problem. There are a lot of common myths about order. One is that a table or query has a default order. So if I insert a bunch of data into a table and I say select star from table, I'm always going to get data in the same order, right? No, you won't. That an outer query has to obey an inner order. So if I have a CTE or a subquery that says select top 10 star from wherever, order by something, and then I select from that CTE on the outer thing, I don't have to put the order by anymore. That's not true either. Top 100% order by, I still see people do this. They put this in views and they expect that the order by will actually do something. It doesn't do anything. And more importantly than all of these is that the optimizer will process your query in a specific order. So people think, oh, well, if I filter out these rows first and then I filter out these other rows, it would never do that in the opposite order. And actually, SQL Server isn't bound to process your statement in the order you wrote it. So I have a few examples for these. So I'm going to create a simple table with an ID, and it's an integer, and it's a primary key, and that means it's clustered. So the clustered index is on the integer, and that's just because SQL Server does clustered primary key by default. And then I have a first name column that's varchar32, and I uppercase my keyword there, bad Aaron, or my data type. So I'm going to purposely insert 3 rows. So Mike, Grant, and Aaron are 1, 2, and 3. They're not in alphabetical order. So I have 3 rows in there. Now, if I just say select ID first name from dbo.what and I don't have an order by clause, I'm going to get these back in the, what's going on? 5.
To lock up?
Oh, sorry. No, it just switched focus.
Oh.
So I get these back in the clustered index order, 1, 2, 3, Mike, Grant, Aaron. Now, I might have written an application around this that sends this specific query to the database and says select from this table, and it comes in a certain order, and I have my nice little grid in my application that has 1, 2, 3, right? Then someone comes along and for some other purpose, might be a completely different person, has a search store procedure that looks up people by name. So they get a missing index recommendation from Management Studio or from the digging in the plan cache, and they say, oh, well, I'm going to create this index on first name. So they do that. And then users start calling and complaining because this select ID first name from dbo.what now comes back in alphabetical order. And the reason is that it chose the non-clustered index instead of the clustered index. Top 100% doesn't help, so we have this subquery where we say select top 100% ID first name from dbo.what order by ID, and we select from that. And we say, well, if we put this in a view, for example, right, which some people will try to do, and now we don't have to change the application code because we're calling this view, and no, that doesn't help. I still get it back in alphabetical order because that's still chosen. And I can't add the explicit ordering in the CTE either. Same thing happens. I get it back in alphabetical order. So the only way that I've been able to do this with a CTE is if I actually have to materialize the information from the CTE. So if I take the actual ordering column out of the CTE and display it,
wow,
then I get the order I want. But that's not documented, not guaranteed. That's just observation. Don't rely on observation. That's what happened here. You relied on observation here that it came out in a certain order, right? So don't believe that. Another thing about order by, don't use lazy shorthand like order by 1, order by 2. So that refers to the column ordinal in the select list, and that's fine for ad hoc stuff. Don't put that in production code, because what's going to happen is you're going to have this big long query that has order by 1 at the end, and someone's going to go throw a column at the beginning of your column list, or change the table structure, right? And then it's going to be a problem. We don't like maintenance that requires us to go fix things later. Mm-hmm. Evaluation order. So I have a table called ID int, and it has a maybe numeric column that's a varchar32. And I'm going to insert 3 rows in there. One has a value of 900, 2 has a value of the name of this conference, and 3 has a value of 420.
Is that a weed joke?
No, yeah, maybe. So if I try to do something against this maybe numeric column, I'm obviously going to have an error if I try to
Oh.
filter out the numeric or non-numeric rows first, right? So select ID maybe numeric times 10 from this table where maybe numeric is greater than 500. I'm going to get an error. Conversion failed when converting the value GroupBy to data type int, and that's not because of the math. That's because it's trying to figure out if the string GroupBy is greater than 500.
Nice.
So it also fails if you filter it away first, right? So this is the case I was talking about where I say, well, I said maybe numeric not a number first. So this is a replacement for isNumeric. Don't use isNumeric; it's terrible. Use string parsing.
You need to
So select ID maybe numeric times 10 from dbo.splunge where maybe numeric not like a number, or not a number, and maybe numeric is greater than 500. So SQL Server still tries to do the greater than 500 before it tries to do any string parsing. So not good. This even happens if you try to stuff it into a CTE. So I'm going to use a CTE first, and I'm going to make sure that the only thing that can possibly come out of the CTE are the numeric values, and we can test that. This is why I like CTEs, because you can test the CTE by itself first. So select these values from the table where the maybe numeric is not a string, and I get these two rows, 900 and 420. That should work, right? So with filtered as, select those two rows, select ID maybe numeric times 10 from filtered where maybe numeric is greater than 500. No, still fails. So SQL Server, it isn't forced to evaluate the CTE first, and in fact, in a lot of cases, it will basically collapse that, treat it like an inline view, and it will actually collapse it or expand it into your query. So try convert works if you're on SQL Server 2012 or better. So select ID maybe numeric times 10 from dbo.splunge where try convert int maybe numeric is greater than 500, and that works. I don't know if that's guaranteed to always perform the filter before it performs the expression. So it still might not be a safe thing to do. And in older versions, you can use a case expression. So case when maybe numeric is not a number, then maybe numeric end is greater than 500. What that does is for any row that doesn't have a numeric value in that column, it will return null inside of that case expression and compare null to greater than 500, and then it drops it out of the result. Right, so that works as well. And what's in the CTE doesn't really matter. So even in this case, I'm doing the try convert, right, which should filter out those rows first. But it's still, even though I use try convert inside the CTE, it still fails. So it's not going to work in all scenarios. So, and this is why you shouldn't use isNumeric. So I'm taking isNumeric of a period of 1E99, a $, 0D27, and a tab.
A tab.
Those all return isNumeric is equal to 1. So that's why you shouldn't use isNumeric. Terrible. Wow. Terrible.
Yeah, Andy says the same thing in Slack. He says scientific notation. Yeah, that was what I figured too. Anything that looks even remotely like scientific notation will pass.
All right, so I have a couple more demos for the query efficiently section. So I know that people are going to use cursors. I don't expect that everybody's going to just stop using cursors because people like me say they're bad and slow, even though they are. I know people are going to keep doing that. But most people, when they're using cursors, it's a fire hose cursor, right? So they start at the beginning, they loop through every row exactly once, and then they end. And they're not doing where update of, they don't need outer scope. So when you set up a default cursor in SQL Server, it has all this extra overhead, all this extra locking that allows you to scroll backward and forward and skip rows and do all this stuff. People aren't writing cursors that do that. 99% of the cursors out there are just go through once and you're done, right? So if you have to use cursors, and I'm not judging you for using cursors, make sure you use the right options, and I'll show that. Select star, this seems like an obvious one that I don't have to say, but I still find it in production code all the time. Don't use select star in production, and aside from the performance, I'll show you why, maintenance-wise, you don't want to do that. A count of a table should not need to touch actual data. So I see people all the time saying select count star from table. and they lock the entire table and wait for that count to come back. And I always argue that they should use the DMVs for that, because the DMVs have a pretty accurate picture of how many rows are in that table at any given time. Not transactionally consistent, because it's in memory and there are transactions in action. But and they say, well, I need my count to be super accurate. And I say to them, if your system is busy enough that the DMV is not accurate, here's what you're doing. You're locking the entire table, right? Because a count is going to escalate to a table lock. And you're going to lock that entire table, and you're going to scan the entire thing and count all those rows. If your system is really busy, what are all those other transactions doing while you're scanning that entire table? They're waiting. So you lock the table, you scan that entire thing, you get your accurate count, and then you release the locks on your table. You release the locks on the table, and all those transactions come in and insert and update and delete. How accurate is your count now? Yeah. It's not accurate at all. It would have been more accurate if you looked at the DMV for that point in time, because the scan took time and a whole bunch of things happened after the scan finished. Try not to use NOLOCK like a blanket. I see a lot of people that have like this Linux NOLOCK complex where they actually have policies in their organizations to put NOLOCK on every select statement. That's bad, and we know about all the little things that can happen with NOLOCK. I'm going to show a really fun one. And pick GroupBy over distinct generally. So a lot of people will throw distinct at the beginning of a. Uh-oh, Hugo disagrees with me about something.
What? Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Is this the format thing? Okay.
No, it was something new, something from this slide, I think. So pick GroupBy over distinct generally, and that is because in some cases what will happen is distinct and GroupBy will do essentially the same thing, right? They'll eliminate duplicates. And GroupBy isn't the most intuitive way to do that, but because GroupBy is used for aggregates, not for eliminating duplicates. But what distinct will do often is if you have an expression that happens and it's eliminating the results of that expression. So let's say you're doing XML for XML path string concatenation, it will create all of the rows that have that string concatenation, and it will do the concatenation every time for every row, and then it will apply distinct. GroupBy will group the rows first, and then only apply those calculations once per deduplicated row. So a few examples here. So cursor options. So I have a couple of variables, sysname, declare at I sysname and at D datetime2. And datetime2 is just to track how long it took to run this cursor. I'm going to declare C cursor for select name from sys.all objects, cross join, select top 50 sys.all objects. This is just a nonsense query to chew up some time. Open the cursor, fetch into the cursor. While the fetch status is not equal to -1, I'm just incrementing an empty string to a variable, and I'm closing and deallocating and measuring the amount of time. Pretty simple thing. So we'll see how long that takes. Brent, do you have any jokes? You must have a joke.
Oh, golly, I don't have any database jokes. I know there's always the two DBAs walk into a bar, a NoSQL bar, and they leave because they couldn't find a table. That's really bad. Yep, that's all I got.
All right. So that cursor took 8.4 seconds to run. And again, all it did was just loop through the values in the row and do something silly. Now, if this cursor is like most cursors, it can be a local fast-forward cursor, which means it's not visible globally, it means you can't scroll, and it means you can't use where update of. And we run this exact same code, and I'll drop the clean buffers again, just to make sure I'm not fooling you by benefiting from having sys.all objects data in memory. And we run that code again, and all I changed was local fast forward on my cursor, and it finished in 1.5 seconds. You wouldn't have even had time to tell your joke. Right?
Dang it, so I just looked up a joke.
So I quadrupled the efficiency of this query just by adding those things to the cursor. All right, schema stability. So when we have select star, so we have a simple table with 2 integer columns, and we insert 2 values, 1 and 2. And now we have a view that says select star from dbo.x, right? So now I can reference the view and get all the rows from that table. and someone comes along and says, well, you know what, that column B, that really should have been called C. This doesn't happen often, but it can happen. And then they say, what B really should have been is a date time column. And then we're also going to add this other column D, which is new ID. Right? So we get a warning. I get a warning when I change that column. The person who wrote the view didn't get that warning, right? It doesn't send out an email to those people. So if I select from the table, I've got my 4 columns now, A, C, B, and D. And B is a date time, you'll notice, and C is an integer that has what used to be in B. But if I select from the view, I get a very different thing, right? So these are supposed to reference the same objects. Select star from the table and select star from the view, and the output looks very different, even though the view should really just be a pointer, right, to the table. But what it ends up being is a pointer to very specific metadata from when the view was created, what the table looked like at that time.
Wah, wah.
Right? So that's not good. Now your application breaks because it's expecting B to be an integer, but it's actually a date time. So you can fix that with sp refresh view or sp refresh SQL module. And now when I select from the view, it's actually correct.
Never seen that before.
Remus, who works at Microsoft, he showed me this little trick a long time ago, and I use it in this demo all the time. If you want people to not use select star against your table, you can add a computed column called don't use select star as 1/0. So it allows you to add that to the table, but if I try to select star from dbo.x, I get a divide by 0 error encountered. And it doesn't tell me why, but if I look at the results, I get this column called don't use select star.
Lovely.
Which is a pretty neat trick.
Lovely.
So I'll drop those. Don't do that in production. That's fun to do to your developers.
For the record,
right, so
Remus is a developer.
Yes, true. So select count star from table name. This is obviously going to scan the entire table. Even if you use NOLOCK, it's far more efficient to just look at sys.partitions or sys.dmdv partition stats. Those both have a count that's going to be pretty accurate, especially if all you're doing is ballparking. All right, so NOLOCK. So let's clean up the cache and the buffers. So we all know with NOLOCK that you can read a row that never existed. You can read the same row twice. You can miss a row entirely, and you can get this could not scan due to data movement error. Paul White showed me this example once. I forget where he posted this. So we have a table that has an int column and a varchar max column. And we're going to insert one row, and it's just 16,100 x's. Right? That's the value that's in the table.
It's pretty dirty.
Now, in a different session, I'm going to run this code. This actually requires me to take this and open a new query window. Could have had it prepared, but. So I'm just declaring the value that I read. So this is just a variable that's going to hold an assignment from the table. And then I have 2 values. One is 16,100 x's, and one is 16,100 y's. And I'm just going to run in a loop, and I'm going to alternate between x's and y's. Or I'm just going to read whether the table has all x's or all y's in that value. So if we go back here, and in this session, what I'm going to do is something very similar. So I have the same declare values, right? So all x's, 16,100 x's, and all y's, 16,100 y's. And I'm just going to run in a loop, and I'm going to update the table back and forth. I'm going to switch it from all y's to all x's to all y's to all x's, and just alternate back and forth. And we'll see what happens. So I'm going to do this, and my disk's going to spin up, and you probably won't hear anything because it's quiet, but we go back to this new query window I opened. Now I'm going to run this, and what this does is if I ever find a value in that column that I'm alternating in this other thing, because I'm using read uncommitted, I want to see if I ever see a value that doesn't quite match what I expect to be in there and shouldn't be possible, right? If an update is an atomic operation, I should never see a mix of values,
some
right?
x's and some y's, right?
Yeah. So what this does is it breaks as soon as it finds a value that has some x's and some y's, that isn't all x's and all y's.
That's genius.
And it happens right away. Right, so let me go stop this one. So blow up my log. So if we scroll over, At some point, yeah. See, you see the Y's over there on the right.
Oh.
So what we did is we actually, because we're using NOLOCK, we actually read a single value that never existed, right? Because what happened was SQL Server was updating the value to be 16,100 X's, and it finished one page, and we read that, and then we read the next page before it got to it, before the update proceeded to the next page. Or we read the second page first, right? So it's hard to tell what actually happened behind the scenes, and you could if we really dug in, but that's kind of out of scope for this. But anyway, it's kind of impressive that you can read a value that is essentially data corruption, right? That's not the data that was ever in the table.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
If you have an email, if you're reading and sending out emails to customers and you're using NOLOCK and you have a lob, right, for the message body, you could end up with some pretty interesting things. You could pull, a message for your consumer reports subscriber and mix it with your Penthouse subscriber, and that would be some interesting.
That's where your X's and Y's are coming from, I see.
Yeah, right. All right, so distinct versus GroupBy, and this just shows. So I want to pull these up in Plan Explorer. So basically what these are just two queries that do the same thing. They do XML path concatenation. They use the same methods for everything except one uses distinct and one uses GroupBy. Oops, I didn't mean to open Slack. This is the problem with having both taskbars on the bottom. Yeah. Let me do this. Plan Explorer. So we go in here, and we have these two queries in here, and we take a look at the results. And this demo failed because so this is doing the same amount of reads now. So in some cases when you run this, I think it might be because I've done this before and it cached a plan, but in some cases I've done this and it actually ended up doing a work table. And you'll see work tables pop in and out of certain queries depending on how many times you've run them. The first couple times you might see a work table and the other times you won't. And where the extra reads, it did 10 times more reads for the distinct. And what it is from the work table that it used to generate these the XML concatenation over and over and over.
I was going to guess a database with a different CE was what I was going to guess, but
that's possible.
Yeah,
possible. I'm not sure, but anyway, a lot of times you'll see these two operations are the same, but you will see cases where they're different, where distinct will actually be more expensive. Okay, and then I have one more thing about querying efficiently, and that is the kitchen sink procedure. I'm not going to demo this because I know I'm over on time, so I don't want to go through the demo. But basically, you have this massive search form where people can enter 50 different criteria and any combination of criteria. And what people do is they try to optimize. They try to create a store procedure that takes all these optional parameters, and they have where column is equal to where parameter is null or column is equal to parameter. And they have 50 of these. And they expect SQL Server to build some magical plan that can cater to all combinations of parameters. And that's a terrible idea. SQL Server is never going to be able to build a single plan that will satisfy all of those different criteria. And adding option recompile doesn't help because it still builds the same plan shape even if you have different parameters that are passed, right? So my solution to that is to use dynamic SQL. When you have a certain set of if you have a certain set of parameters that are passed into the store procedure, you get a specific plan built for those specific parameters. Not even the parameter values, but just those parameters, right? So the first time you call it, let's say someone says, well, I want to search on account opened is between, and I wouldn't use between, I would use greater than or equal to June 1st and less than June 15th, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And so SQL Server builds a plan that says, okay, I'm going to use the non-clustered index on the date-time column to find all the rows that match the criteria or match the query, and then I'll go get the other columns. So it builds a plan based on that index seek. The next time someone runs the store procedure, like, oh, I have a plan for this store procedure already, but they passed in last name, and now you're trying to use an index seek on a date-time column and finding all the rows where the customer last name is equal to foo. That doesn't work so well, right? So you're reusing that same plan over and over again, even though the parameters have changed. So my solution is to use dynamic SQL, where you build a statement based on the actual parameters that were passed. And you can do this, and I have a blog post and a video about it that are linked in the notes. It's pretty simple to do. It's dynamic SQL, so it makes the I'm sorry?
Builds a perfect query plan for whatever combo of parameters you pass in.
It builds a perfect plan for exactly what combo of parameters you have, right? And if you use optimize for ad hoc workloads, you don't have to worry about the odd guy that specified all the parameters once, taking up valuable space in the plan cache, because optimize for ad hoc workloads will allow you to only cache a full plan for a query that's been called more than once. So you'll have all these separate varieties of execution plans that are tuned specifically for the parameters that were passed. Now, to deal with the values, you can add option recompile to the dynamic SQL statement that you create in each case, so that you aren't bitten by parameter sniffing. So you solve two problems by using dynamic SQL for that. So I'm going to skip the demo for that. So the last thing I have is stay employed, and I always get a couple of laughs out of this. So there's no undo or Control-Z in SQL Server. Right? So people will go in and they'll delete from some table, and they'll leave out the where clause, or they'll forget the where clause, and they deleted 6 billion rows. And the next thing they do is they go refresh their resume. So Mladen's SSMS Tools Pack allows you to modify the new query template. So every time you click New Query, you can have it pop up this, which is begin transaction, and then the cursor goes. The cursor will be placed right in between the begin, and then you have commit and rollback commented out. So what you can do is you can if you pop up a new query window and you write something really quickly and hit commit or hit execute, and you made a mistake, now I can highlight rollback and roll it back, and possibly not get fired. I might lock the table enough where I've disrupted the application and the users that maybe I only get a dock and pay or something instead of actually getting fired.
Promotion.
But that will at least allow you to avoid those problems where you have to go to backup to fix the problem. There is an issue, though. You can cause a different problem, and that is you can say begin transaction, delete 10 rows from some table, and it works, and you're happy, and it's all fine, and you go to lunch or you go on vacation. You forgot to highlight commit, and so you have this dangling orphan transaction that never gets committed, and that can cause a resume changing event as well. So
agreed.
So that is all I have. I have like I said, I have the demos and the slide deck up on GroupBy.org, so they're on you can download them right from my session. And I saw Adam said that those queries are not really logically equivalent. Distinct is on both columns, whereas your GroupBy is only on one. The same thing happens if you say GroupBy ID column, comma, and then the output of the concatenation. So.
All right. Well, we hit right up against our time limit here, and I didn't want to rush anything with questions because the content is so freaking good. What we'll do is we'll take all the questions and give those back over to Aaron so that he can go back and blog about them, tweet about them, whatever. You can also ask your questions over in Slack or in Twitter, where it's easier for the presenters to go through and answer stuff. We can also answer some of them in text along the way. But before we wrap up here, I want to thank Aaron for spending his time this morning working with you guys and teaching you about bad habits in T-SQL. Normally I would ask for a round of applause, but of course virtual applause is better here. So feel free to go get Aaron's stuff. It's available now at groupby.org/go/session9. You can leave comments over there to ask him questions as well.
Sure.
So
thanks, Brian. Can you tell us how to get to Slack? Where do we go in Slack for this?
Go to dbatools.io. So dbatools.io has a Slack community. If you go down to the very bottom, they have exactly. So it's SQLServerCommunity.slack.com. And then there's a GroupBy room, so #GroupBy or #GroupBy. Okay. So up next will be Hugo Cornelis. We'll go ahead and switch over now. But thanks, Aaron, for teaching everybody this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.